without truth.
I will only tell the truth. I will only tell the truth. Truth.
What's up, y'all? It's the Fireman here. It's Fire Friday again. And today we got episode 7 of my life, A Story of Redemption. And so if you tuned in last week, I talked about the anticipation of waiting to get out of prison and go home. You know, doing something that I had dreamed of since the first day of being inside is what would it look like of getting out of prison and being a new person? You know, not thinking the same as I thought before, not acting the same as I once acted, but trying to be this new man that Christ had been molding and shaping and developing me to be. And honestly, being excited and being scared to death at the same time. And so the time came. I went outside, the gate opened, I walked out the gate. My fiance, Julie, came out the car. My stepfather came out the car, and my mother was still in the car. And as I said on the last episode, my aunt, my mother's sister, had told me like a day before that things were going to be different. Things weren't going to be what I probably anticipated and expecting them to be. And so I was a little prepared for that, but not much. And so as I approached the car, after giving hugs and handshakes, I approached the car to see my mother. When I looked inside, man, I didn't even recognize her. And I know that may be a little bit difficult to understand or comprehend because it's like it's your mother. You know, you've seen her for, at that point in time, 35 years of my life. But I saw her in the car and I did not recognize her at all. She's a person that used to go get her hair done a lot and get a perm. You know, her hair was straight naturally and mine is naturally curly. So she would go get a perm to get it curly and her hair was straight. I can't even remember like really ever except being a little child seeing my mother with straight hair. She was extremely pale. She was really small, like weight wise. My mother was always a fit, solid woman. And now she was just like, man, really just like skin and bones. And so her face was kind of sunken in. And I was just like, wow, man, like my heart was like full of joy, full of heartache, full of pain, full of disgust, anger. Because I felt like this was a result of my decisions and my actions that put her in this situation that she was in. And so I had a lot of emotions going on. So we got in the car, me and Julie got in the back seat and we hopped on the road and I was anxious and I was nervous and I was like, I just want to get home, you know, and just like get away. You know, get out of the state of Missouri, get back to Illinois, a place that I was familiar with, the place where I was from. And along the way, we had to stop and get gas. And so I remember getting out of the car at that gas station and just looking around, you know, just looking around me. And for the first time in over 15 years, there wasn't a door, there wasn't a gate, there wasn't a fence, there weren't bars. Like none of that stuff existed. It was the free world. It was freedom. And honestly, like I've never been a runner, although I have run at various points to lose weight or to get in shape or to stay in shape. But I just felt like running because there was nothing that was going to hinder me. There was going to be nothing to impede me running except like me like fatiguing physically or my wind, you know, like I can't breathe because I'm just all run out. Like that would be the only thing that would stop me, but nothing man-made would stop me. And it was a surreal experience. And then we got into the convenience mart and I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed at the choices, you know, of figuring out what did I want to drink? What did I want to snack on? I just kind of stood there just like motionless, mind just blank, like, what do I pick? You know, it's like I want one of everything, but I don't want anything. And it was just weird. So I remember I grabbed like, I think a Pepsi and 100-gram bar because I hadn't had one of those in forever. And so we got in the car and we proceeded to drive back home and you know, got a little motion sickness, a little car sickness kind of being in the back. So there really wasn't a lot of talking going on. It was like when I stepped back in the car, I stepped back into this realm of like, what's up with my mother? and she's if you know me, I'm a super talkative person, and I get that from my mother because she is way more talkative than me. My father, on the other hand, was not a man that used a lot of words, and when he did use words, like they had great meaning behind them. And so my mother's very talkative. She wasn't saying anything. My stepfather wasn't saying anything. Julie, if you know her, she's not really a talker either. So she wasn't saying anything. And so I was like the only one that would maybe be talking, and I wasn't talking. So we probably had like a 2, maybe 3 hour ride back to home with virtually silence, no radio on. And the things that were going through my mind was like downtown New York City or something like that, with just like beeps of horns and the sounds of the cars going back and forth, and the squeals of brakes, and the horns of big trucks, and people yelling back and forth. Like, it was just a bunch of busyness going on in my head. I was trying to remain calm, but my mind was very busy. And so we finally got home, and I remember we got like some pizza, I think maybe even some Taco Bell, something like that, ate that stuff. And I was just tired at that point. Like, I couldn't sleep like 3 or 4 days before I got out. And it just all hit me at one time. So I just went back in the room, man, and laid down and fell off to sleep, and woke up and went and ate some more food, and then just kind of sat there, and my mother really didn't have a lot of strength to talk or anything. And I know that was killing her. I know that was killing her. And again, what was on my mind was like, I was like a direct result of like why she was in the state that she was in. At least that's what I was thinking. That what was on my mind. And I know that there was and is some truth to that, even still to this day. And so, it was like life is starting all over new for me. And I got these things that's like going through my head that's kind of pulling me back in, that could have really set me off in a different direction and had me like off my rocker. And so by God's grace, right, the truth of his word, and just knowing that now I'm a son of God, that God has my back, and that even though I have all these things racing through my mind, all this stuff in my heart and inside me, that God is going to help me figure that stuff out. Now, I didn't know like what people were going to help me figure that stuff out, because now I'm in a world void of my Christian brothers. I'm in a world now where when I had issues or problems and heartache and pain, I had people I could turn to. And now I had no one. But I had God's word, that I could seek solace and seek peace and rest in that. But honestly, for me, sometimes I need people too, to comfort me, to put their arm around my neck, and to embrace me, and to hear those verbal affirmations of things are going to be all right, that God is he's going to protect you. He's your comforter. He will protect you from the storms. He won't stop the storms per se, but he'll be there with you during and through the storms. And so although I know these truths in my head, for me, words of affirmation go a long way for me. And so not knowing who and where that would come from was scary, because I knew that I was going to need it. And so I also knew that I loved my fiance, and that we had talked hours through phones, through visits, and through letters about what we wanted our life to look like. And so I was eager and very anxious to begin being a husband and being a step parent. And so about 30 days after getting out, a little bit after 30 days, about 5 weeks of getting out, we got married. It wasn't anything fancy. It was the justice of the peace. We got a marriage license, went to the courthouse. My aunt was there as like a witness. I think the guy that married us, he had on like jeans and a t-shirt. I think he was a judge. I don't know, but he threw on like one of those judges, like smocks or whatever those things are, those gowns, and married us. And it was really quick. And we went out and had some lunch afterwards. And now I was officially a married man. And I never knew what that would really look like as far as my wedding. I didn't have any like thoughts of a grandiose wedding or anything like that. But the important thing for me was that here was a woman that I loved that had, went through a part of this struggle, 6 years of the 15 and a half years that we had known each other. And she had become a place of comfort, a place of peace, a person of rational thinking. Someone that's very different from me, not just on appearance, but background, that could really help challenged some of my ways of thinking, to kind of open up my mind to see that the world is much bigger than this little tiny world that I had become accustomed to in prison, but even out of prison from my upbringing, to think that I'm never going to be nothing. I'm from East St. Louis, Illinois. I'm from the ghetto, and I've always been told I got potential in my life, but I've never had anyone to help me realize that potential or to help push me into that potential. It basically all rolled on my shoulders, and because of different circumstances that took place in my life, that just faded quickly, and I became a product of my environment. And so I had someone now that can encourage me and say, you are so much more. You can be so much more. And so that was great in my life. And that was a godsend in my life. And so we got married, and I still, because of parole, I had a home plan to my mother's house, and she was living outside in the suburbs of Chicago. And so she, would live there while I lived in Illinois, Southern Illinois. And the next step for me was finding a job. After about the first, I don't know, maybe week of binge watching all these movies that I hadn't got to see and eating all this food I hadn't got to eat, it was like I'm restless now. I'm used to going to get some rec. I'm used to hanging out. I'm used to doing all kind of stuff, and now I don't have that. And so I wanted a job. Not only did I want a job, I needed a job. There's something that God, I believe, has built in a man that he needs and wants to work. That's a part of our DNA, I believe. And so I remember a conversation I had with Julie. I'm like, man, I'm ready to fill out these job applications. And she's like, hold on a minute. Like, it don't work like that no more. And I'm like, what you mean it don't work like that? Like, I'm filling out a job application so I can try to get me a job. And she was like, well, you go online now and you fill out applications. And I'm like, online? What's online? This was 2009. So it wasn't like the 80s or the early 90s. I didn't know what online was. I didn't know what that meant. And so I remember getting on the computer, and we got on the World Wide Web. And the first thing she said was, you got to get an email address. And I was like, an email? Like, what the heck is that? And she was like, it's an electronic mail. That's what the E is. And I'm like, okay, all right. So she's like, you can get AOL, you can get Hotmail, you could get like Gmail. And I was like, Gmail, like that's gangster right there. Just to be honest, that's how I selected my email server or whatever it is, Gmail. And it was years, like, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years before I even knew what the G stood for. But I was just like, man, I was a G. I was a gangster. I was about that life. And although I'm not about that life no more, it just sounded hip and cool like Gmail. And so I was like, all right, cool. Let's sign up for the Gmail. And so as we start signing up for it, she's like, you got to pick like something. And most people maybe pick something with their name. So I was like, all right, cool. So I just like lewisdooley@gmail.com. Nope, somebody got it. I'm like, what? I'm like, what does that mean? She's like, somebody else has lewisdooley@gmail.com. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm the only Lewis Dooley. Well, turns out I'm not the only Lewis Dooley. So then I tried like, first initial, last name at Gmail. That was taken. Then I put like first name, last initial at Gmail. That was taken. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, this is blowing my mind. Like, all this stuff I'm typing in, like somebody already has this as their email. And I'm like, man, so I just put like, I was typing in L Dooley, and I accidentally put a .com before the @gmail.com. And it said that was open. So I was, out of frustration and being tired of trying to figure out stuff, I just like, yes, this the one. And so my email address became ldooley.com@gmail.com. And that's still exactly what it is today, over 10 years later. I've had many interesting conversations about that, which I won't go into. But the reason I share that story is just because in 2009, to have a 35-year-old adult that's from the United States of America in the free world, not having any idea what the internet is or email is, it was kind of odd, and it really showed me how disconnected I was from the world. I mean, I knew I was disconnected, but I've been a person like, I've always been a person that felt like I could do whatever I set my mind to and I could come up to speed quickly. And I've never really been behind. I was always the guy out front. And really, for one of the first times in my life, I felt like I was behind, man, and I was behind a lot. And so that kind of weighed on me a little bit, and it made me really start second guessing, man, can I really make it in this world? Like, this world is so far advanced, I don't stand a chance. But I wasn't going to let that stop me because I am a fighter. And so, I started filling out things online, but because of my hard headedness, I said, I'm going to go to some places and ask them for applications too. So we drove around and went to a few places and nothing. And so by God's grace, my mentor who ran Set Free Ministries inside Potosi Correctional Center, Randy Gruber, he had a company, a landscaping company. And so he said, because of him being a volunteer in prison and me being a former inmate and not being out on parole, we can't have contact with each other. Like, we can't be talking on the phone. We can't email, none of that kind of stuff. We could like find ourselves like in a church together or, like a public place or something. And so he really wanted to keep in touch with me. But more importantly, he knew the importance of me having a job and what that would look like for my life and how good that would be. So he went all the way to the top of the Missouri Department of Corrections, to the director at the time. He's not the director anymore, but he went to the director's office. And this is the story that he told me. He went into his office and said, look, I know here's what the rules are, but I'm asking for special permission that he could hire Lewis Dooley for his landscaping company. And he said he took his volunteer ID card, his hard plastic badge, and he set it on the desk and slid it to the director, and basically saying, I'm asking for Lewis to work with me or I'm turning in my volunteer badge. And like, when he told me that, for one of the rare instances in my life, I was speechless. Like, this is a man that started this ministry, or God allowed him to be a part of a ministry back in 1974. Like, that was the year I was born. And now here it is 35 years later. And this man has given his life to this. His whole life's work, his whole career, if you will, was embedded in being a volunteer in prisons and jails to help men and women be able to know Christ and understand his word and to learn how to walk with God, and also to then go disciple others. This man was basically putting his career on the line for me. He basically put his career on the line for me. And so, that was a bold move, and something that I feel like outside of a parent, who it would make sense that a parent would sacrifice something so great for their child, that it seemed as if he was treating me like I was one of his children. That's the sacrifice I felt that he was making, that he would even make for his own kids. And so they came back and told him, okay. And it's like, wow, man, like, and that like, to us, that was the first time something like that had been done. And so they got permission. And so now I would drive over to St. Louis, Missouri, about a 30-40 minute drive, 5 days a week, early in the morning. I didn't know how to cut grass. I couldn't stand cutting grass before I went to prison. I'm not an outdoorsy person, so I don't like that fresh grass cut smell. I don't like none of that stuff. But I'm like, I don't care. Like, this man put his career on the line, and I want a job, and I don't care what the job gonna be. Like, I want to work. The Bible says if you don't work, you don't eat. And if you know me, you know I like to eat. So that means I definitely got to work. And so I learned he had like a 16-year-old guy named Andrew and about a maybe 19, 20-year-old guy named Nick. And he was the driver. And that's who would mentor me in how to cut grass and do that kind of stuff at a really good high level. And so from August to about November, I was on that crew, cutting grass and being responsible and getting a paycheck and getting a banking account and driving to the bank and putting the check in the little plastic thing and sending it through the chute. Something I saw my mother do for years, but something I had never done. So for the first time at 35 years old, I got my own bank account and I'm depositing my own checks and all these types of things. And that made me feel some sort of independence. It also made me feel like a man. made me feel like a man, that I had some responsibility now, that I knew how to do things and that I could do them just like a productive member of society could do them. And so that worked out pretty good. November came. I got the paperwork and everything approved to move up to where my wife was living. So now we would be living together. And then almost like every weekend and every other weekend, we would drive back down, 4.5 hours down to spend time with my mother and stuff like that. And eventually, December 26th, the day after Christmas, we were down there. And early that morning, my mother died. And, it was a somber feeling. My second parent, being dead and having missed all those years with her. But by God's grace, he allowed me to have several months to get a chance to spend some time with her, to experience her pain physically and emotionally that she went through, which I don't wish that didn't happen. I don't like the feeling it gave me, but, it's one of those things where the Bible says you reap what you sow. And I feel that was a time of me reaping some of the heartache and pain that I had sown into the relationship with my mother and I prior to me going to prison. And then the fact that I basically stripped myself out of her life for all those years. And so I was experiencing some of that. And, I deserved it. There's consequences for our actions. And I deserved some of those things. And that stuff can build character in you if you allow it. And that's what I've allowed it to do. And so my mother died. There was no reason for me really to be coming back down anymore. So now my next step in life was, now I'm living in Carroll Stream, Illinois. And I didn't know where the heck that was, but I know for me, it was like Beverly Hills compared to where from East St. Louis. So I'm like, all right, it's cool. It's nice up here. But what's the next step? Got to find a job. And so went through the process again, filling out applications online, but also driving around to places and filling out applications. And I wasn't getting any takers. A couple places called me in for an interview. And I did my best to sell myself, to try to let them know, man, I'll be the hardest and best worker that you have. I'll be to work early. I'll stay late if need be. I'll come in on my days off if you need me. I'll be an exemplary employee if you allow me to be. And a couple places said they really wish they could give me a chance, but because the company itself had policy that felons couldn't be hired. And honestly, looking back, I can understand that. At least in my case, I'm 35 years old, never really had a job before. Didn't have any kind of skills, marketable skills that I could put on paper, like college or any kind of tech schools. Had none of that kind of stuff. And I had this big gap, in my life of all these years with no work history. So what could I show an employer? How could I show them I would be loyal and that I was a hard worker? I had nothing to really back that up. And so I was disappointed and started kind of slipping into a little bit of a depression. And I remember one day calling Randy Gruber because I said before, he's a mentor, great friend, and even like a father to me. And I remember telling him on the phone, I just want to go back to prison because I can't figure this stuff out, man. I feel like I'm doing all the things that God wants me to do. Now, with that being said, it wasn't like I'm a saint or I was void of any sin in my life. There was struggles that I had coming out of prison, and then there was new struggles that surfaced that I never experienced before. So I was fighting a good fight, but I was fighting a good fight, and I was trying to remain as faithful as I could. And I felt like, dang, God, you ain't showing up, and I can't figure out life out here. When I was in prison, I had, in a sense, mastered, how to do time. I had became like one of those bars or one of those doors or one of those windows. I was a fixture in the prison. I had people I depended on, but then there was a lot of people that depended on me. And I had built a life there, and I couldn't figure out how to build a life out here in the real world. And so I remember his words was, don't do anything stupid. And I was like, I'm not going to do anything stupid. I'm not going to break the law. I'm done with breaking the law. But man, I can't figure this thing out. And so he just encouraged me to just keep praying and to just remain faithful and to be trusting God that he'll provide. And so he also said, I got a good friend that lives up in West Chicago. Do you know where that's at? And I'm like, yeah, that's like not far away from me. He was like, I'm gonna contact him and I'm gonna connect you guys because maybe he has connections up there to get you a job. So I'm like, all right, cool, bet that up. And so a couple days later, I get a phone call from this guy, and he's like, hey, let's go have breakfast. I'm like, all right, where you want to meet? He was like, I'm gonna come pick you up. I was like, well, I got a license in the car, like, I can get there. He was like, nope, I'm coming to pick you up. I'm like, all right. So I don't know, maybe a day or so later, this like looked to be like 80-year-old or 90-year-old or 100-year-old guy comes and walks up to the door. I get out, we get in the car, we drive to this restaurant where they had like omelets like this big, and I'm like, man, gigantic. And so we ate breakfast, got to know each other a little bit, and I shared my story with him and where areas I needed help in. And so he said, I'm gonna make a call to a guy and put you in touch with him at a church and see if there would be like something that like he might have connections because he works at a church or something. I'm like, all right, that's cool. So I got in touch with this guy, and he actually was at a church called Willow Creek Church in one of their campuses in DuPage County. And I remember talking to the guy, and I was super eager. I was trying to be like prim and proper and not use slang or sound ghetto or nothing like that. Cause I'm like, I don't want to give this guy the impression like I'm some like knucklehead that isn't smart, because that's the stereotype, right? And so I kind of shared with him I'm looking for a job, and he was like, well, we don't have any housing or anything like that. And that just really struck me, like, where did he get that from? Like, I wasn't looking for housing. I really wasn't like asking for nothing but other than like a job lead. And I was saying, is there some volunteer work I can do at the church? It's like, you know what? If I can't find a job, I can go volunteer because I got all this time and nothing to do with it. And so he was like, you know what? Look, I'm going to give you the number of our main campus in Barrington, and you can contact them and maybe they can find something for you. So I was really disappointed with this guy. But then I made this call to this church, and I knew nothing about this church, never heard of it before, nothing like that. I made the call, and a person answered. Now, you may be thinking, well, of course, many times you call, like, people answer. Not like a church of this size, not a mega church where you call and, like, it may be like 1 in 100 times that somebody might actually pick the phone up because it's a big church and they're very busy. But this lady picked up named Ann. And I continued to talk to her, and she said, hey, we have a monthly prison and jail meeting every first Saturday of the month at 10 o'clock. Why don't you come join us for that, and we can meet and we can talk more? And I was like, bet. And so I don't know if it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever day it was that upcoming Saturday. So I was geeked. I was like, yeah, man. So I put on my best clothes I had and had to look on the map and figure out how to get there. And, that was a challenge because I didn't know north, south, east, or west or none of that kind of stuff. And so I managed to get there, and I got there like an hour early. And my motto has always been, if I'm 10 minutes early, that means I'm 15 minutes late. So I've always been an early person anyway, because I think that shows people something. When you be there early, it shows that you're eager and that you're ready. And that's what type of dude I am. And so I got there and met a really good friend, and then people started coming in. And then I met Ann, and they had a guest speaker that day. And his name was Pete. And Pete started talking about coffee. Now, I can't stand coffee. And this is how much I can't stand coffee. When I was talking to Julie when I was in prison and I found out she liked coffee, I was like, look, if we get married, like, you got to give up coffee. Like, that's how much I can't stand the smell and taste of that stuff. And you know what? She was like, I can do that for you. Which that's love. Like, now I know coffee drinkers serious. Like, that's real love right there if you're willing to give up coffee for somebody. So she was like, yeah. And so he talked about starting a coffee company, and that's where I'm going to stop. That's where I'm going to stop. So if you want to hear more of this story, I have another video next week for you to hear the second part of this, or the rest of this story, about how this guy Pete and how him starting a coffee company, how that impacted my life in a great way. Who'd ever thought? I would have never thought that coffee, something that I can't stand the smell or taste of, would have such a life-changing effect for me. So if you want to know more of the story, tune in next Friday. Again, if you know anybody that may find value in seeing these videos, then pass the link on to other people. They can go to YouTube. They can friend me on Facebook, and they can see other videos, and they can see links to these videos there. If you think they have value, if you think there's somebody that's been incarcerated that's out now, who could hear some of my struggles, and they could learn some things that I've learned to help them in their life. Or maybe it's a person who has someone incarcerated that maybe they would hear some of the stuff I'm saying and it would resonate with them, and maybe it would help them better build a relationship with their loved one that is incarcerated. Or there may be some resources I talk about on here that can help their loved one when they get out of prison. So whatever the case may be, man, tune in next week to episode 8. Man, I can't believe it, man. I had wrote a script for like 6 episodes, and now I'm talking about next week, episode 8. And man, I don't know if this thing will ever end, but hopefully it's entertaining, or you find some value in it, or something like that. But it's been a joy. It's been a blessing. Fireman out. Peace.